Welcome to Accommodate This. My name is David, and I am a late diagnosed autistic adult. I was terminated from my job in 2023 when I reported workplace misconduct. Near the end of my career, my new supervisor removed me from my established teaching role without providing clear direction for my new role. And when I struggled to meet unclear expectations, she falsely accused me of poor performance to higher ups. And then she forced me to work under a less qualified colleague who frequently moved the goalposts. I felt targeted and unfairly pressured, and any attempt to seek clarification was dismissed as pushback. Ultimately, both my manager and director pulled me aside and told me that I needed to improve my professionalism. But then they refused to define what that meant. And so that just left me confused and feeling unsupported. And since then, I've decided to use my own voice to raise awareness of this discriminatory practice. Statistics show that around 85% of autistics are unemployed or underemployed, which is a stark contrast compared to the 4% unemployment rate for everyone else. So it's important to me to bring awareness to these tragedies. Recent studies show that the discrimination I faced is actually a pattern of discrimination that has become commonplace in our current society. In this video, I plan to quote large swaths of information from several studies, but I will provide links in the description in case you want to see more details. And now that you understand why we're here, let's get into the topic for this video: professionalism. The concept of professionalism is often misunderstood. While many people claim to understand it, few can provide a concrete definition. Some may rely on personal intuition and describing professionalism as something that they would recognize when they see it, or recognize that it's lacking when they don't see it. But if you press them for specifics, they really struggle to articulate anything concrete. That's weird because the idea of professionalism is not new. Going back as far as Plato, he observed that true professions are grounded in shared goals such as health, justice, or salvation. And that suggested that the definition of professionalism is inherently tied to specific objectives of each profession. So it's really up to professionals themselves, using their experience and expertise, to determine the best strategies for success in their field. And that requires a sense of ownership and autonomy that allows the professionals to make informed decisions that align best with the interests of their business and the people they serve. Despite the long-standing importance of professionalism, many industries still lack a clear definition of it. Instead, they would rather rely on outdated social norms and hierarchies, which serve to perpetuate a power structure that benefits the majority, but at the expense of marginalized groups. And while businesses may outwardly claim to share the values of the public, their actions often reveal a different reality. The majorities demanded conformity from marginalized communities for decades, and then they'd falsely assert that they've made progress toward inclusivity. But this hypocritical behavior is both insulting and harmful, particularly to the neurominority, because we struggle to conform to rules that are often very confusing and not intuitive to us. But since the neurodivergent are in the minority, accounting for only 15 to 25% of the population, we are significantly outnumbered. So we are often forced to accept majority rule, conforming to the detriment of our mental health, all under the guise that adding more people to the total count is what diversity is about. But that's actually dismissive, not inclusive. Diversity is not about popular opinions. It's about valuing opinions and experiences of everyone, even those in the minority. So in practice, we tend to see that rather than striving for a better future for all, the majority has clung to power for selfish reasons to perpetuate the hegemony, which is the dominant worldview held by the majority within a given society. I talk a lot about that in my video on lies, which you can see here. By maintaining control over the definition of professionalism, they prioritize their own social standing over the needs and perspectives of those closest to the work. Now, I don't want this to sound like reverse prejudice against the majority, because some industries have made progress in developing more inclusive and ethical definitions of professionalism. One promising study analyzed the factors that contribute contribute to professionalism among medical students. And they identified three key categories: professional parameters, professional behavior, and professional responsibility. And then within each of those categories, they defined various qualities of social pressures that influence professional development. The study found that professional behavior encompassed not only external presentation, but also internal skills and relationships. I have an image of the chart here. You may want to pause the video at this point to look at it in greater detail because there's a lot to it. I encourage you to explore the chart in full just for a more in-depth understanding of these categories and their subcomponents. Another study identified four common perspectives: the humanist perspective, which emphasizes respect and personal integrity; the portrayer's perspective of professionalism focuses on appearance and appropriate expression; the facilitator perspective believes that professionalism involves standards, policies, and personal beliefs; and the fourth, regulators, prioritize communication, acceptance, and implementation of suitable beliefs and standards. Several studies have focused on defining professionalism within healthcare, a field that I hold in high regard, and that field has wide-ranging effects that directly impact humanity. So those studies tend to highlight the importance of a comprehensive approach that benefits the industry and its clients. While specific attributes may vary across the different branches of healthcare, common themes include educational background, adherence to ethical codes, professional organization involvement, ongoing education, effective communication, autonomy, community service, theoretical knowledge, and research contributions. The point is, every person is different, so reliance on intuition alone is insufficient to ensure professional conduct. True professionalism requires a deep understanding of the goals of that profession, a commitment to truth and transparency, the discipline to uphold ethical principles, and a continuous pursuit of knowledge. These fundamental principles, though not entirely new, still remain uncommon in today's world. Unfortunately, professionalism has been misused as a tool of social control, informally dictating acceptable work behaviors. Companies recognize the value in individual professionalism, claiming it's an essential characteristic of the talent that they're attempting to attract and retain. But without a clear definition, it's impossible to recognize or measure professionalism, and that makes it difficult to manage and improve. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Organizations face challenges in establishing a universal definition that applies across all occupational contexts, but many have attempted to create measurable definitions of professionalism because they may not fully align with everyone's individual work ethic. But all their attempts to narrow the definition of professionalism often lead to oversimplification. Some have reduced it to impression management, which is the practice of manipulating one's image to influence others' perceptions. This approach often involves avoiding counterproductive work behaviors, which harm the organization or its members. Both of these ideas rely heavily on deception and conformity, and they dominate societal norms, which often discriminate against the minority. Plus, the definitions of what's professional can change as societal dynamics shift. The behaviors considered professional or unprofessional can vary depending on the demographic makeup of each sector. Ultimately, acceptable behaviors become norms that are incorporated into values, policies, and performance evaluations, making discrimination a material component of the job. And many companies provide an employee manual and annual training courses, which often contain vague guidelines, leaving a lot of room for interpretation. Studies found that companies use such manuals and policies as a form of posturing, claiming to be welcoming and inclusive while failing to truly embrace diversity. These policies become marketing tools designed to enhance the company's competitive edge and maintain the dominant worldview, rather than fostering a genuine, diverse, and inclusive workplace. I know diversity itself is a complex concept, as illustrated by the saying from The Incredibles.
And when everyone's super, no one will be.
While people share common characteristics, they also possess unique qualities, both visible and invisible. So efforts to define professionalism universally can tend to undermine diversity initiatives. So companies struggle to navigate the paradox of diversity and difference as they attempt to balance these competing priorities. They often choose between two approaches. The professionalization approach prioritizes the dignity of individuals within a profession, while the commercialization approach exploits people for profit and social advantage. Neurodivergent individuals like myself prefer the professionalization approach because we view it as more honorable and just, but the majority tends to value commercialization. And that leads to a lot of stressors for the minority, such as discrimination, internalized shame, and psychological distress. Companies with a strong culture that values conformity and service often prioritize commercial interests over the public welfare. When faced with concerns about equitable hiring practices, these companies may focus on meeting numerical targets rather than creating an inclusive environment. They often use the term professional in a superficial way, emphasizing manners like punctuality, appearance, respectful questioning, but they neglect the broader public interest implications. Their ideal professional is often depicted as someone who works long hours, looks intelligent, and always prioritizes the company and client's needs, even at personal cost. But we know that this approach creates a cycle of abuse that benefits management without compensating employees, who may become overly loyal due to fear of job loss. These companies often claim ownership over their employees' time and behavior, both during and outside of work hours. This form of professionalism can mask discrimination by treating characteristics like gender, personal identity, and home life as problematic. The de-emphasis of public interest work and pressure to conform to peer behaviors and appearances can create a form of material gatekeeping that prioritizes conformity over humanity. Public messages increasingly reflect a shift away from the commercialized approach of earlier decades, and diversity initiatives are fostering new perspectives on work practices and appearance, challenging traditional stereotypes. That's all wonderful. Employers who prioritize professionalization over commercialization often focus on public interest aspects of the work, and they redefine the professional image to include openness about personal lives and valuing qualities like agility, star performance, and full engagement. While these values may seem positive, they can still contain implicit bias, such as the patriarchal expectation of the ideal worker, which tends to exclude women and minorities. For example, agility is often associated with fitness, high performance, and multitasking, which can be very challenging for the neurodivergent individual who may require conforming to societal norms that mask one's true self. And agility can be considered inaccessible to those with limited resources or unsustainable for minorities in the long term. Research suggests that while senior management may support work-life balance, its implementation can be very inconsistent throughout the organization. And despite outwardly emphasizing the importance of bringing one's whole self to work, productivity remains a pervasive theme, where they demand an individual's full commitment to the professional role. And that approach often ignores the needs to balance work and personal life and focuses instead on integrating personal identity into professional life. And that just overlooks individual needs and can create challenges for those who struggle to reconcile work and personal commitments. I worked for the health insurance industry for over 2 decades, most recently as a trainer for new staff. Despite my expertise, the role was demanding, requiring me to mask my autistic traits over long periods of time, and that would make my recovery time higher and higher each time I taught a class. I ended up pushing myself beyond my limits because I believed that was the expectation. I thought I had a strong understanding of professionalism, but I found myself at odds with my manager, who often compared me to an unattainable standard and expected me to just intuitively know what was expected without ever explaining it. Despite positive feedback from my students and my openness about my diagnosis, my manager seemed unable to appreciate any of my efforts to meet those demands. I sought direction and clarification, but I was met with resistance, eventually being forbidden from asking questions at all. And her inability to articulate expectations clearly contributed to our conflicts. Attitudes like this illustrate how my former employer emphasized the commercial aspects of diversity rather than the human side. And studies indicate that companies like this, who treat diversity as a commercial product, only appear to embrace change while reinforcing existing cultural norms. So this approach de-emphasizes social justice by maintaining an in-group and an out-group mentality that discriminates against minorities. Studies show that unless companies actively seek out talented individuals from diverse backgrounds, there's a risk of promoting people based on connections rather than qualifications. Professional organizations and regulators should probably reflect on the ethical implications of that approach. At some point, businesses must establish an impartial governing body to administer and interpret what is professional, preventing any one group from dominating the others. Otherwise, we risk erosion of decency in our culture and the rise of skloka. Skloka is a term describing base, petty hostility and vicious infighting within a group. It thrives on defamation, spying, scheming, and slander, igniting base passions. And such behavior naturally arises from desperation and a breakdown of moral values. Competition, a sense of superiority and othering, can lead to harmful actions designed to promote one demographic over another. And I'm afraid we live in a time of rampant, unhinged skloka. And many employers seem unconcerned by it because they benefit from this discriminatory system, which allows them to claim professional authority while exhibiting unwarranted elitism. Today, professionalism is less about faithfulness, trustfulness, and expertise than it is about a company's decline in moral authority, which leaves them managing who should dominate whom and how. As ethics and morality are defined solely by the majority, minorities are being forced to compromise their needs and values or face consequences. Studies repeatedly show the majority abusing the term professionalism for self-serving purposes, such as enhancing social status, opposing regulations, denying moral accountability, or justifying restrictive practices. The majority controls who they deem professional and decides which traits are worthy of advancement. Lack of regulation allows them to exclude whomever they please. And this form of discrimination has been challenged by laws like the Equal Opportunity Act of 1967, or the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1972, or the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. But these laws have shown to have limited success in actually changing attitudes. This is partly due to the fact that they tend to focus on procedures rather than cultural change. Equality discourses have become ideological battlegrounds between policies centered on material redistribution and those focused on recognizing individual dignity. The dominant worldview often promotes the idea of who you know being more important than what you know. And this notion is celebrated in many places, but it just reinforces the views of the majority and can be detrimental to minorities who struggle to comply with unjust expectations. It also prioritizes connections over expertise, which potentially lead to poverty or forcing minorities to mask their true selves. Networks should be viewed as mechanisms for protecting employee rights, not merely for market access. So many studies have sought a universal definition of professionalism, but it is inherently reliant on the specific goals of each profession. Instead of high-level executives deciding the best approach, professionalism really should allow workers more control to define which behaviors lead to better success in their role. Traditionally, professional behavior often included leaving personal life at home, serving clients, self-sacrifice, de-emphasizing diversity, emphasizing homogeneity, and complacency and deceit. But this just leads workers to feel less autonomous and reduces their sense of responsibility. They become robots moving from task to task without feeling or ideas of their own. And these themes may have commercial value, but they exclude the human aspect and assume everyone can apply with the majority worldview. Now, more enlightened companies that accept diversity have adopted new themes, such as embracing diversity and a whole self work approach. But in our capitalist society, even these companies have been found to prioritize commercial interests over challenging their own discriminating cultures. The focus instead remains on fitting diversity into the existing framework rather than dismantling the limited framework to be more inclusive. But we have to do better. Studies show that prioritizing commercial commercial self-interest over public and human interests has real harms to minorities. Unless we work together to redefine professionalism to be more inclusive, minorities will continue to be marginalized and ignored. We need to be honest with ourselves and willing to examine our unhealthy reliance on deceit and our marriage to exclusionary cultures. By expanding the definition of professionalism, we can create a more equitable and just workplace for everyone.